When I want to know about esports, I go to his channel. This is Steel, and you're watching Thorin.
Right, this is going to be a new episode of Daring Minds. Me and Gio are back, and our guest for this one is going to be bENITA, who is a legendary Counter-Strike female player. She's many times over world champion in that game. In Valorant, she was most recently second place in the Americas Game Changers and also second place in the Grand Final Game Changers last year. And obviously, we're going to talk about the conclusion to VCT Tokyo, some of the storylines there. So what I thought I'd do is, normally we just go with the champion and work our way backwards through the interesting storylines. But we did actually, on our last episode, go through every team in the playoffs except one, because at the end, it was just getting to be a really long episode. And we didn't talk about Team Liquid, who obviously just shit the bed in the playoffs and just did basically nothing and underwhelmed everyone a little bit. So let's just start there, which is bENITA. What did you think of Team Liquid? I mean, on paper, this is supposed to be like something of a super team or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, they just very underwhelming. Didn't show up. I don't know why or what had happened. But yeah, just didn't show up at all.
What about some of the players on that team? Are there some that you actually hold in high esteem? Is there a reason why you would think they would do well?
I mean, honestly, I think that Redcar just didn't have I think he's one of their stars, and he just didn't show up at all. And people can have bad matches, people can have bad tournaments, bad lands. It happens. So I'm just gonna chalk it off as a one-time thing.
Sure. What do you think, Gio? What went wrong?
So I remember I watched the game that they played against Evil Geniuses, and I think that the way that Team Liquid play... Now, I obviously don't watch a lot of EMEA, so I don't know if this is how they usually play or if this is just how they played at Tokyo, but I assume that it's indicative of their normal way of playing. I found that the way that they played at Tokyo was almost exactly the playstyle that a team like Evil Geniuses countered really well. For example, they're really slow on their engages. And the problem is when you go against a team like those teams that ended up in the top 3, so it's not just Evil Geniuses, but Fnatic and Paper Rex are both the sorts of teams that are going to be able to counter this really well, just in their natural way of playing, is that if you're really slow, you're basically just going to end up funneling yourself into this onslaught of utility that won't end from your opponent. And especially if they're really good at managing their utility well to last. So it's not like you can kind of burst them down in one go or anything like that. And so they just end up kind of putting themselves into this position where they don't have a lot of time to be able to do a really well planned out engage, because they've left so much time to actually make their engage. And then in order to actually do that, they're just going into just an absolute fucking shit show. I don't know, like a garbage can. I think that also, I wasn't super impressed with their post plants. I feel like their ability to take duels in post plant situations was a bit lackluster compared to some of their opponents. And it was just kind of things like that, which is you could see players like Nat, and it always comes down to Nats, right? But players like Nats really trying hard and doing their role pretty well. And actually it was very interesting because this was another one of those teams where I think it was really indicative of the region they come from, just compositionally. You'd always see Nats on something like a Cypher, for example, whereas the North American teams would be bringing Killjoys. So you've kind of got the differences that come from that. And you would have these individuals like Nats who would kind of be doing his job well, but you can only do so much if you're one guy, especially if you're taking on that role where you're doing a lot of the lurking and you're doing, this sentinel role and whatever. So I just kind of felt like a lot of these key components of what you need to be able to do in Valorant at the moment, they weren't awful at, they just weren't good enough at, or they did it in a way
region
that was
diff. Yeah, it was basically a region diff, just the gameplay in general and just everything. It just seems like they were not up to par on it,
Yeah. They ran, so for example, on their first map that they played against EG, which was in on Fracture. You know, they did the kind of like the double controller, which is still really popular in a lot of these EMEA compositions, versus like the double initiator that EMEA brought out, which is really facilitating of this kind of more kind of like aggressive, or like I don't even, aggressive makes it sound mindless, but like very confident, very coordinated style that you're seeing from teams like EG, like Paper X, and like Fnatic. And yeah, it was very like set up for just being more slow and extremely defaulty, but like being really defaulty only gets you so far if you're not actually working off of like the information that you're getting on that default within the first minute of the round, you know? Like,
Yeah, well, double controller is a really different gameplay, and on Fracture in NA at least, like that is not a thing. Like
Yeah.
we just don't do that. It's a completely different game plan.
What do you think of the current meta, bENITA? Like, obviously, there are teams like Paper X that just do whatever they want. It seems like. What do you think is the like best approach to the meta right now? What's the strongest for you?
I feel like NA so far has like the best approach. You know, the crazy, they have that one crazy Jet or Neon. They have the really, really good controller player who's just has great game sense, awareness, and then they have their support players like the Sova, the Breach. I think double controller is actually like really decent, but it really, at the end of the day, like Valorant is such a game where anything can work. It just depends on your players. Like,
Right.
It really depends on your players, who's feeling comfortable on what, and you can make honestly anything work. Like I believe it in like any game, in any comp.
Okay. By the way, is that part of the game something you enjoy? Do you prefer like CS, where it's just you, the players, different, or do you like having the different agents and characters?
I mean, I've always said it since day one that I think, like, I just think that the like skill gap in Valorant and like the mechanical gap is too quote unquote easy.
Right.
As far as like
A
agents,
lot of old CSGO pros tell me that. That's the thing privately they complain about. They say like the spray and stuff's not, and the like their burst aim's not as good, etc.
Yeah, like you could just easily tell like when someone, like in CS, if you're good, you're really good. You won't lose to someone who's like, I don't know. I don't know what the ranks are, but in Valorant you can lose to like kind of anyone, just because at the end of the day, like they're the abilities, you push one button, you get a kill with an ult or something like that. Like just the skill gap isn't as like, yeah, I wish it was harder in a way.
that's an interesting take, because I would argue that while it's perfectly valid to say that the mechanical skill gap isn't as big, to say that the skill gap overall isn't as big, I think is really unfair, because just because it's a different kind of skill does not make it less skilled. So like, you know, being able to manipulate a situation with abilities to get a win over, I don't know, let's say you're like a diamond player and you kill a radiant player, like if you want to put it in ranked terms.
Okay.
Like, I don't think that like that, obviously sometimes, yeah, that's going to be a fluke. It depends on the situation. But someone who's in Radiant because they are an extremely mechanically gifted player is not inherently better than someone who is in like, you know, it's not inherently better than somebody who's good at Valorant because their use of abilities is really good. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it's necessarily.
I think that might confuse people, because obviously the ranks do exist. So by definition, they are better.
Ranks, yeah,
I know what you
like
mean. You mean essentially you can counter someone's like raw mechanical skill with like your ability to use ults.
Yeah, I kind of realized halfway through that analogy that using ranks was maybe a bit of a dumb idea. But like, but yeah, like if ranks were determined purely by mechanical skill, was maybe a better way of setting up that analogy. But yeah, I think that's like the whole point. That's why you have different roles, and that's kind of just what comes from it being a different game. Like, do you know what I mean? Like it's
I
I
completely respect it's a different game.
Yeah,
we were actually originally sold on it being a tactical FPS, and when we all swapped over, it wasn't. So if we're still here, we're here. It's because we love the game. It has nothing to do with, you know, definitely respect that it's two different games.
By the way, shout out to Gio, because, I mean, here's the thing, I'm sort of ruining it now because this won't be released today. But technically, we are recording. It's not a live show. We are recording it on the 4th of July. And I promise you, she really does love America. She wants to move there. Even though she is wearing the hat of a country that, like, spoiler Gio, we actually fought like a proxy war through them to try and get America back. But it's okay, though. It's all good. Don't worry about that. It's just a coincidence she's wearing that
America basically
cap.
went independent because we decided we wanted Canada. Like,
Sort of. Okay.
Yeah, I know. I kind of realized it as soon as I
Luckily, it's not going to come out today, so it's all good. It's all good.
Look, it's one of those days. It's like greasy hair, no makeup, like whatever.
Okay. I mean, the thing is, I would tell you, like all the simps, like you look great without makeup, but I'm not a liar. So, just honest.
Fucking
God.
Just keeping it real. I thought everyone wanted honesty. What the hell? Okay. Right, okay. Speaking of honesty.
Appreciate you, Duncan.
Let's talk, actually. We'll go to the winner of the tournament. So obviously Fnatic did win the tournament. Like, spoiler, they are still the best team in the world. The team looked cracked out even when they made this lineup. They won the lock-in tournament. They won the European one. They've won this. They win everything, apparently. So, bENITA, they are the best team, right? Fnatic's just the best. Why are they the best, though?
Yeah, I think they're the best. I think they have it kind of like just nailed down a little bit. Like, they're a core that has a lot of experience together, especially like under like really, really, really high pressure situations. And yeah, it just seems like every tournament so far has just been going their way. They're playing against teams who are like less experienced or just not having their moment. But it seems like when they're in like really down, they're like their strength is bringing it back to the W for them.
Okay, resilience.
Yeah, resilience. That's a perfect word. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair way of looking at them. You know, it's funny because I didn't get to watch the finals live. And so I woke up the next day, saw the scoreline, and I was like, oh shit, okay, this must have been like a bit of a flop of a game. And when I like got round to watching it and kind of realized how the scoreline kept kind of going like this.
Oh, it's back and forth,
like,
right?
oh, it's actually, well, it was sort of like Fnatic would get like some rounds and then EG would sort of catch up and then Fnatic would be like, nope, we're pushing forward. So it was always like EG was slightly chasing them.
Right.
But there certainly was like a competitive aspect to it. It wasn't like a complete stomp of a 3-0. And yeah, I think that's like really indicative of that fact that Fnatic are just kind of like one step ahead, and they have been together longer than this EG roster have, and I think that definitely has a you know, a not insignificant effect on it. And I think that Fnatic have become really good at managing themselves mentally because they've been in this for so long, right? All the way back from when they came second in Masters Reykjavik 2021, didn't make it to Berlin, and then had some questionable tournaments. Like, I'm pretty sure Champs 2021, they like didn't go very far in that tournament. All the way to, you know, lock-in, where that Icebox comeback is just going to go down in history. To the point where just now they're just extremely good. Like, what is going to be able to deter them mentally? I'm actually not sure. I'm not sure. I think this might be the best team insofar as mental resilience is, as well as their just resilience in the server as well. Like, you know, it's incredibly impressive. And I think that when they go up against really impressive teams like Evil Geniuses have been in recent history, they're going to be able to just kind of find that little way of like dodging out of their way. And it was actually interesting, in one of the maps, I remember Golden Boy did an interview, like a sort of sideline interview with Emil, and he basically said, like, look, you've beaten Fnatic before, like, what have you got to do to actually do it? And Emil was like, don't try to be better than them, just be annoying. Like, that's like what you've got to do, because you're not going to be better than them. It's just not going to happen. And I think that's true, you know?
What about, obviously, one of the things that impressed a lot of people about this team, bENITA, is, like, if you even just look at the stats, they used to be like Durka had to, like, be the MVP, basically. Two of the players who aren't even Durka were top 3 in stats. Like, the team just seems pretty stacked now. Who are the players that are impressing you in this team?
I'm gonna have to give it to Boaster. I think I just always have a soft spot for IGLs. I think it takes a lot of just overall composition of like being a good player and a good human Like combining
Okay.
that into like a really high pressure environment and like being able to like keep it up for like a BO3 or BO5 is very, very impressive. Yeah, like maybe his kills or whatever is not there, but I don't know.
You liking the storyline?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I,
Go on.
I just think like even watching them when you're like actually watching them, Boasters, like he wears his emotions on like his sleeve and like you could see everything that he's going through. You could see like the
Yes.
highs and the lows, and I think that's really, I don't know, I think that's really great.
Well, yeah, one thing I'll say he does a very good job of, which actually some people in Valorant, I'll give credit to people like Kankai who seem to have picked this up, but actually a lot of the Valorant players, because they're newer or they weren't that big in CSGO, I know Boaster wasn't a top player in CSGO, but he's actually learned what all the top male CSGO pros know, which is when the camera's on you, you play up to the camera. Like if you win the clutch, you do a big sort of a celebration. If you lose, you do the more. Like that actually does win your fans over. That makes people have the human interest in it. They do care about you if you do that. If people don't know, in CSGO right now, it's one of the reasons Cadian, who's a very good in-game leader, is mega popular right now because he's probably the best at playing up to it. So it definitely, I can see why he draws people in. Right, one thing I thought we could talk about, because you definitely have some inside info here, bENITA, is obviously for this final, I'm just going to guess, just intuiting here, you were probably mad biased on what the Evil Geniuses to win, because if people don't know, the coach of Evil Geniuses, Potter, is obviously the long-time former teammate of bENITA's here back in CSGO. And one thing people won't know is this, bENITA. I've obviously hired her for like Flashpoint, where we did CSGO stuff, and she was an analyst. But as an analyst, right, she is a teddy bear. She's like really like cuddly, like nice personality. She's very rarely ever being brutal or savage. But I've heard as a player, she's one of the most like competitive out there. And she was like the trash talk and everything. What would you say to that side? What is the other side of Potter? Because I think people are going to imagine she's like the analyst side as the coach, but I'm guessing she isn't.
Oh man, Potter is just, I can't even think of like a word to, like, you're right. Like outside of the server, she's like an amazing human, like very, very, what's the word? Social and
yeah, for sure.
Like she has that like aura where like she'll like kind of like drag you into her vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. She's really chill. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, chill. And really fun to be around. And then when you're in a server with her, whether it's like a coach slot or player slot, I haven't been with her as a coach, but she was my IGL for a very, very long time. She has like this switch where it's like her competitive drive is like through the roof. Like she projects being like one of the best or very confident in like her ability. So that's kind of what you want in a coach or IGL, is like the confidence in their ability to read the game.
Yes.
And she's very, very good at that. And yeah, I think with EG that like I think she's like the kind of like the perfect fit in EG, because they have Ethan, which is the only experienced player, and then they have Potter, who's very well-rounded in experience, whether it's IGL player, in female player, in co-ed, analyst, on the desk. She's just very well-rounded, and I think that newer experienced players can learn a lot from Potter. So.
Because, by the way, that thing I alluded to there, if people don't know, like I obviously know her in person as well, but she's the sort of person where, especially like off camera, if she was talking about like, the other female players, she's savage. She'd be like talking about how she's going to cut their heads off and fucking smash them all. They're all trash. Like, I love it though. She's got a fiery personality. It's just in the right setting, as you say. Absolutely.
Yeah, it definitely brought us like that fire personality. Like, you need one of those on every team.
Yes.
If you don't have that, like, you're not going to, you might like not win a tournament, because if you don't have that fire, confidence, personality within your circle, like it's just, you're lacking in a department.
Yeah, I would actually say that's actually an area. I took me a long time. I wasn't the most social person in the beginning of esports. I used to just look at the players in the server and do what every fan does. Like you put together the all-star team, or you put this guy. What you have to realize, like you're saying, you also need like a personality balance. Like everyone can't be like that. You can't have everyone be super intense. You can't have everyone be super laid back. You got to like get the balance just right, so they sort of offset each other. You cover each other's weaknesses. Everyone's strengths bond together. I definitely agree. That's like a thing I've noticed over the years. It's why in every team there'll always be that person that gets the blame if you lose. Who's like laughing. And it's like, that might actually be the guy who's like raising them up out of being depressed because they lost the game. That might actually be why they bounce back next. So it's always tricky to judge those personalities for sure. What do you think, Gio, of this EG run? Obviously, it's pretty epic they made the final. And as you say, it was actually a close final.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really impressed with EG. I've obviously been like humble bragging because I did a video in like
you also did say they were the team that will go to the final, by the way. Oh, you said they'd do better than everyone expected.
I did like a video in January saying that EG were going to be the best team in Americas, and everyone thought I was crazy. So yeah, I've been really impressed with them. I've just enjoyed their story a lot, and it's also just crazy because obviously everybody talks about Demon One coming in and changing things, and we spoke a bit last week about some of the ways that did have an effect. You know, I think one of the big things that I pointed out was specifically the roles that Demon One plays allows EG to have a lot more flexibility on roles in a way that other teams don't because of the specific roles that there's flexibility in. But I do think that, this EG roster being as good as they are as the 5-man roster, it's whatever Potter is adding is unlocking them, because I think that one of the really impressive things about EG is how prepared they seem to be for so many different scenarios. Now, obviously, if you're a coach, you can't just come up with an infinite permutation of scenarios and teach your players every single strict thing they have to do. If this happens, if this happens, if this happens. But what you can do, or at least attempt to do, is teach them how to think for themselves about those things, right? And you'll have your set plays and you'll have certain things that you've specifically planned, but it's about how to unlock them so that when they're in the server and you're not there to talk to them outside of your tag timeouts, like they can figure those things out. And I think that when you see a coach who's managed to get that with their players so well, that's what's really impressive to me, especially just when you consider that EG have been a developing project over quite some time.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And it just seems to be that these 6 people, the 5 main, the 5-man main roster, and then Potter, have some like real good way of communicating with one another and understanding one another so that they can do something like this. And
wasn't this team when it was formed, Gio? I think people actually flamed the roster, right? Because it was some like actually, as Benita said, it's only really Ethan's like a big name. Some of the others were more like small names, and people thought if you're going to get the VCT spot, you should go mega and get like Ye and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, when the partnership team was formed, so a lot of people kind of like were skeptical about the fact that EG wanted a 10-man roster anyway, because they were like, well, what the fuck's happening here?
Yes.
Because, how are you gonna, who are you gonna settle on? Like,
that was right. They kept the old players and then they added a bunch as well, didn't they? Right? Yeah, and they made the 10-man.
Yeah,
yes.
it was as far as I remember, it was the only roster that all 5 players from the previous roster were kept on.
Ah, right. Okay.
But yeah, then they picked up a bunch of people, and yeah, like you say, Ethan's the only one who really had a ton of experience, and people knew that they were kind of doing open tryouts and stuff like that, and they were like, what is going on here? Like, why Optic lost their spot for this shit? You know what I mean? And yeah, I think that in the wrong hands, under the wrong coach, under the wrong kind of development system, that absolutely could have been a strategy that would have fallen on its face. There's no guarantee that was ever going to work. It was definitely a risk. But EG have had Potter on the roster for like 2 years now, and so they clearly very much trust her, and that trust has paid off. So yeah, I just find them super impressive, because if you compare it to a team like Fnatic, who are also very good at being prepared for a lot of different scenarios, the difference is Boaster is their IGL, and while he's obviously not their coach, he works so closely with Mini to also like come up with those strategies and stuff. So they essentially have a sort of semi-coach on their roster with them and can like go through these things in real time while they're playing. But EG don't really have that. So you have to kind of, as a team, learn to be extra prepared. And I feel like what I'm saying here is essentially speculation on my part, because I haven't been on a team, but maybe bENITA would be able to like confirm or deny.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't have your coach and IGL sitting together most of the time and discussing theories or whatever, protocols, reactions, if you don't have that, like, yeah, you're always going to be on two different pages. The team is probably not going to work out in terms of finding success. But yeah, another point I wanted to reply to
come on.
something about EG. I think that EG as an org has kind of demonstrated that they like believe in their like system.
For sure.
Like they don't care about like anything else, and they like really focus on their developmental program, and they like believe in it, which is like, you know, not many orgs are like that at all.
Yes.
Many orgs like lean towards like, oh no, like success here, making a change right away, or they like, you know, drop one player, two player,
Yes.
whatever it is. So I think EG is unique in a way.
Yeah, I would just say on that topic, if people don't know, obviously going beyond even just Valorant, where they did this approach, like we're saying, with the 10-man roster and keeping the old players that maybe hadn't performed that well.
Yeah.
They've done the same in all the games. Like obviously in League of Legends, they had those two players who were like the young rookies who were winning the championship. In CSGO, look, the results haven't been good, but you can't deny they did try having 3 different teams, and they were all NA talents, and they've even gone to an NA lineup again. So they're certainly committed to the idea of like fostering NA talent or growing their own players. Whereas if people don't know, they definitely have the money. I mean, you saw in the Counter-Strike off-season, they could have had big names. They could have had players where they can pay people 25k a month. They have the big bucks. So it's definitely a different approach. I'll give you that. It's definitely a different theme. By the way, obviously the most famous player in terms, as you say, bENITA, is Ethan, who used to be like a top like entry type player in CSGO. He was in like the semis of majors and stuff. What do you think of him in Valorant?
I think you need people like that in Valorant, like people. I guess I'm kind of talking about myself too, but like the experienced, older.
Okay.
I just think you need it because Valorant's too like new of a game. A lot of people just don't have that experience, and it's very, very like underestimated in Valorant. But I think it makes a really big impact. But yeah, while I was on the desk during VCT, we made like this analogy that there's like Jenga, and you know, if you pull the piece out and it's Ethan's name, like Jenga being EG, it's over.
Right.
Yeah.
I see.
So
it's the key piece holding it all up. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. What about obviously the whole hype for this tournament, Gio, was like, will Demon 1 be there? Will he won't? And then like it was the same thing going on with the something guy, but the something guy didn't make it. The Demon 1 guy did make it. Now the Demon 1 guy, it's not like he topped the stats or anything. He wasn't like the most crazy 1v. It wasn't like some year from the past or CNET or something, but he's obviously a very good player for like a beginner player, especially, and not so experienced. What did you actually think of his performance in EG, Gio?
I mean, I'm very impressed by Demon 1. He does have some, I mean, he's obviously not experienced in the same way that we're talking about Ethan being experienced. But I think one thing that pissed some people off, including him, was that people were talking about him as if he had just tried out, never had been on a team before, and that's actually not true. So he'd not been on a tier one team before. But no, I'm like really impressed with Demon 1. I think that I mean, his mechanical skill is obviously very impressive. And one thing that I've really sung his praises for is the fact that he can go between the duelist and the smoker roles, which I think is quite a rare skill set, but that also really affects his play style as a duelist, because you see the way he kind of can do this lurking play style on Jett, which means he isn't really locked in or pigeonholed into just one way of playing that. And I think that's thrown some of their opponents for a loop at times. I mean, there's one like play that you kind of see him do sometimes where like he and Pugnatio will like switch their weapons like halfway through a round, because it means that he can start off with an op, play a little further back, and then when he wants to actually engage onto a site, he's got a Vandal. You know, and because Pugnatio can op, he can then be the guy who's like playing the backline. So there's a lot of little intricacies in the way that he plays Jett, particularly, that makes that gives EG a lot of options. It makes them very versatile in what they can do, and therefore a little harder to predict. Because there are some rounds where he'll just dash into sight and he'll be there with Jorgamo, like if they're doing a double duelist composition or whatever, something like that, or he'll be doing it off the back of like a flash from Ethan. Or there'll be times where, you know, I remember watching like some of their games on Ascen, and he's like lurking in mid-market because, you know, it means that they can take that space, and then much later on in the round, when the site has already been set up, then he can actually go in and play with the rest of the team. And I think that's what, for me, makes Demon 1 very impressive, is not only is he an incredible shot, but he is also a very versatile player within the roles that he does play. And so he's not just like, you know, the kind of 2021 idea of like a jet main that you think of who just has like kind of one mode that you go into. And I think that's something that other teams will potentially have to catch up with. Or maybe a better way of wording that is it may end up kind of altering the general kind of zeitgeist for what playing jet well kind of becomes going into the future.
Okay. By the way, I will say, if people are unfamiliar with who Ethan is from CSGO, not only was he on a top team, Evil Genius at one point in time was like top 2, 3 in the world. They'd beaten the Astralis core. He was in the semis of a major. But he actually probably, if you're talking about raw ability, at the time of switching to Valorant, is probably the best CSGO player to play Valorant professionally now, because a bunch of the other people, like when you see people like Scream, etc., they were sort of semi-washed already in CS. They were on the down end of their career and they were in the smaller teams. And yeah, there was other big names switched over, like the Nitros of the world, but a lot of them switched back, Automatic, etc. Like this guy actually switched, as far as I know, doesn't have any plans to ever go back, and this is the game he's just going to play. So yeah, I'm actually quite impressed that he's managed to make a career doing this interesting role, and he's in one of the top teams now. Fair play to him. He's actually committed to the game, it seems like.
He was on a top team for a while, you know, even like early on in Valorant, he was on 100 Thieves.
I heard also he was the one who actually like chose to leave them or something. I said like no ticket staying or something like that. Because I remember he was with the old one with like Steel and them, right?
That's the 100 Thieves roster he was on, but I can't say I know any details about
fair enough.
His decision to leave or the circumstances of him leaving the roster.
It's all good. Right, what about, if you, being as you come from NA, bENITA, you must be a fan of the Paper X style of playing, right? That is like old school Counter-Strike from NAs. Like it's big balls play. You just frag out, people just individually do whatever they want. It's high skill level. You think some of the Team Liquid lineups, Sarah, you must like this team, right?
I mean, I actually don't.
Oh, okay. You're not a fan? Okay.
During, this is not about Paper X, but in relation, but during our Berlin tournament, we played against a team who is from, what was their region? I don't know. It was like, wait, I have to find it. X10? Okay, I think it was, X10.
That's like Thailand, right?
Thailand, yes. Okay, we played a team who had a very, very similar approach to the game like Paper X, and oh my gosh, it was...
Is it annoying?
It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. It was so annoying because like during like the barrier of every round, as it just kept on going, during the freeze time, we were just like, what the fuck are they doing? Like, they're playing this so stupid, blah, blah, blah. Just do this, just hold in T-spawn. Yeah, and like, it came to a point where we're all sitting in T-spawn and they're just running at us, like, just running at us on Haven, like, down mid, down C, pushed into A lobby. And yeah, we ended up, it was like a really close game. But we ended up winning, but yeah, I'm just like not a fan.
I know what you mean though, because like it's a classic thing, to be fair. It's what the old StarCraft player Adri used to do. He used to get mad at opponents if they beat him, but he thought they played incorrectly. And I would always be like, I've even told him, it's like, bro, they did beat you though. Like, you have to give him credit. But he'd be like, no, but if they'd have played correctly, they'd have done this, and then I would have beaten him. And it's like, I get what you mean, but they're trying to do like sort of a high variance style art, and they're trying to just gamble a bit. Yeah.
No, I get what they mean. Yeah, I get it too. But like, it's all about adjusting, you know.
Yes.
If you got to adjust to get the W, or else they're just not going to be the better team that day.
Indeed. Right, what did you think then, Gio? Obviously, it is just a Paper X classic as well, where it's like they could even win the top. They never do. I know it's always like, oh, we were that far away, but they are entertaining as fuck. You got to give them credit.
Yeah, I actually way prefer this kind of version of Paper X than last year's version of Paper X. I actually never bought into the Paper X hype train particularly, and it was mostly because I found, even though the way they played worked for them, I'm not going to take that away from them. To me, it was just kind of one-dimensional, and to me, I find that boring. Like, you could be someone who frags out like crazy, but if that's like just the way you're winning, I'm just not going to be that interested in it. I just don't.
You don't enjoy the fireworks show of all the frags and the crazy pushes?
Yeah, I just don't find that crazy. Like, my entire like history in esports has always been in, for lack of a better term, like hero shooters, right? Like something where you have a set of abilities and everybody and so that's always been predominantly I like it when people coordinate their abilities really well to set things up, and when there's like complexity and little things like that, and that can absolutely be added with some amazing mechanical play. But if all it is just running and gunning, like if I wanted to watch Call of Duty, I watch Call of Duty. And Call of Duty has a lot more trash talk, and it's really profane and hilarious. So I would absolutely go there instead. But I much prefer this version of Paper X because it felt more like an actual team. And that sounds really funny because they obviously had this sub in CGRS who did a really good job.
Yeah.
But I just felt like there was just a lot more structure amongst players like Forsaken and Jing and Devai. Like, I think we went into quite a bit of detail last week about how Devai, just what he does to be able to support the team, and the way that not only is he kind of really effective as an initiator, but also how he'll swing with a duelist, for example. And so it adds that extra firepower. How the team, I think one thing they're really good at is finding these little avenues that they can take advantage of and lurk in places that most teams wouldn't even dare to try. So if that means going all the way to CT, like, when your team is mostly like attacked and it takes a really long route somewhere else around the map, they'll do it. They're not afraid to do stuff like that. And it's probably really, really fucking annoying for the teams that they play against. But at the end of the day, if you leave those avenues open, they're going to sniff them out. And I find that really interesting to watch. And so I think PRX were a team I sort of underestimated going into this event.
Understandably.
Yeah, well, I was just like, but everyone knows how they play now.
Yeah,
like, they're going to be really easy to read into. And I think that, and partly it's because I haven't really watched Pacific, so I haven't really seen their domestic play this year. But yeah, they came into it and I was like, oh, actually, no, they've really like added some complexity to the way that they play, which I found really impressive.
I mean, I will say that is a classic thing. Whenever anyone has like one style, like the opposite to that in CSGO is the team that won the IM major, the Outsiders Virtus Pro team, which had the super slow, always late round style. It's the same thing. People get annoyed and they think like, oh, next time we'll be prepared. But it's like, if you actually can, the great thing about TAC FPS is if you can execute well enough, then one approach can work. Like, it doesn't matter that the opponent knows it's coming. Like, in this case, if they rush you and they're all really super skilled, you have to win the aim duels. Like, or you have to have perfect U-tail or something. So, yeah, I can see the appeal.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very big thing. And I've probably said this before, but my favorite team from Rainbow Six, who were originally Team Empire and then later became Virtus Pro, so it's kind of funny you mentioned that, they kind of came out of nowhere at the beginning of their story and like they won like 2 majors and came second in the world championships in the space of like 4 months after just coming out of nowhere, because they were like that. They had this one play style, everyone knew how they played, but no one could do anything about it. It took ages for anyone to actually be able to like chip into them. And I think when you have teams like that, they can ride off of that for some time because it takes a while for other teams to be able to learn how to deal with it. But once you find that code gets finally cracked, that's where you have to go back to the drawing board and come up with something new so that you can actually sustain. And sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't happen. And with Paper X, in this case, they have been able to do that successfully, I think.
Right, if you've got your bingo cards at home, that was Gio mentioning Empire from Rainbow Six, but she hasn't yet mentioned Overwatch, and she even avoided mentioning Yampy and him as an in-game leader when we talk about Team Liquid. So far, it's like, it's going to be a harder one to fill out, but there's still time in the episode, right? A question I do have, bENITA, is this. Were you actually salty that Paper X beat NRG? Like, if you're actually like an old school CS person, I think everyone's favourite team really is the NRG core. Like, they're just the real CSGO players, right?
Honestly, I'm like NRG fan number one. I don't know what happened in this tournament, but yeah, I'm a really, really big FNS fan. I think he's one of the greatest IGLs we've had in CS and Valorant.
It seems like he's doing a very good job in Valorant, right? Because the other thing is, like, I got the idea because a lot of people who are pros were telling me, like, they brought a lot of the CSGO fundamentals over.
Yeah.
But it seems like in this game, the other hard thing, if you're from CS, is the MOBA aspect of, like, you have to adapt to the comps, then know how to switch it up, and during a game, adapt to what's going on. That must be a higher difficulty in a way than some of the things in CS, right?
Yeah, I think he's a better caller in Valorant than CS. I mean, yeah, you use everything you learn from CS and bring it to Valorant, but I think the chess in the brain, I think for finesse, like, I don't know if that makes sense, but I think for finesse, like, it shines in Valorant.
Yes.
It's like more and better.
Yeah. I mean, two things. One, everyone knows, obviously, in CSGO, this is a reference to a meme from the old law, that he actually mind gamed the entire South American region to destroying themselves. Like, he's actually like Palpatine or something. And then the other joke is, of course, he's better in Valorant. All the really good IGLs are still playing CSGO. Actually, I love you, FNS. Just call me. You come on the show anytime you want me. Nah, I actually do love him. I think he is pretty legit. And he was underrated in CSGO, I'll give you that. If people don't know, he oftentimes didn't have the best teams. He was often on like the third best NA team. But if you notice, he was always getting upsets over bigger teams. It seemed like an IGL that knows how to use his players, which is an underrated skill. You don't have to just have the best. You get the most out of your pieces, And then same with this one. Like, remember, last year, everyone who's a pleb looking at stats would go, it's just Ye carrying you. Whereas if you actually look now, one, where's Ye at, bro? Has anyone seen that recently? And then secondly, they don't even need you here. They're just fucking popping off still. They weren't even coming in that hot form, right, Gio? And they still made this run. They could have been in the final themselves, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have to agree with bENITA here, where I'm big on the FNS hype train. I think he's definitely up there as one of my favorite IGLs in the game, and I really like that. We talk about different styles that IGLs have, and we've already kind of spoken about Boaster, and I feel like FNS is almost on the other side of the spectrum in that he's so stoic, right? Like, he's very much the rock of the team, and that's something that I find like so fascinating, I think, because probably because I'm like a loud and emotional person. So
you're impressed with the discipline, right?
I look at something like that. But that's it. It's the discipline side of that's really impressive to me, is that FNS won't, like, it's not over until it's over. You're not going to see him start to like falter or like slip because things are maybe going a little worse. And actually, one thing that we've spoken about NRG before is they are that team that they might lose a few games early in a tournament, but then they'll come back and win them later on because they kind of have to absorb the information before they can go and make the specific adaptations. And so I think FNS is just really well equipped to be that guy who, he doesn't miss the forest for the trees when it comes to the performance of the team. He's not going to just look at like, oh, we lost a map, we're terrible, like, we're awful, we're going to emotionally slip out of this. And I think that is really good. And, I want to say, like, especially when you're playing with young players, but like, this core has been together for such a long time now that I don't think that is as much a problem as it maybe would be with other teams. But yeah, I mean, they were the team that I thought would perform below expectation in this tournament. And I don't know, I think like for them, it's easy to kind of look at NRG and be like, oh my God, like they're not living up to how they played as Optic. But the way they played as Optic and the structure they had and their specific playstyle was so designed around that meta last year, and the fact that Ye was very well suited to that, and they kind of put him in the center of that, that what we have here is like, we have still an incredibly skilled team, but they're coming out of that previous structure, and they're they're building this sort of new structure around like the way that things are done now. And you look at a player like, Crashies, for example, who is absolutely insane and has had an incredible performance throughout the course of 2023 this year, whether it's in VCT Americas, whether it's in Tokyo, it doesn't really matter. And so if you zoom in a bit, you actually aren't looking at a team that isn't very good or a team that's slipping. I think it's just a team that's building around that kind of like newer structure. And with Ye having been the previous star and everything being centered around him, that's not the case for Ardis. And so it's still just like a little bit different, And so the fact that they're performing to the level that they are, despite it being such a huge swing in the kind of meta and the fact that the main character of the team is a different person now, I actually think that probably says more about the team than the fact that, they didn't come in the top 3 at this event.
Did you know, I heard actually when they needed to replace Ye, that when they recruited Ardis, that originally he thought FNS was a pirate, Gio. Because he said, this be me carry now. No, whatever. Listen, they don't all land. They thought you've got to take chances like Paper X at like Smart Style.
You're not funny. Has anyone ever told you that?
No one has on Twitter or on Reddit ever. So if anyone out there wants to let me know, just post on any of those platforms, then I definitely will go away and not get more popular. That's how the internet works. Right. One thing I will say that I will always point out as well with the FNS angle, it actually ties into what we were saying earlier, Benito, about synergy between your coach and your IGL, is the other thing that was genius about the FNS move is he brought Chet, I'm a pet, his former coach from the CLG days from CSGO over into Valorant, and they've been together the whole time. Like, that's also got to help. They've got a super long working relationship. It's like that's got to be a great partnership, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I admire the most about like FNS's career is how he's just friends. Like, he's an IGL, right? But he becomes friends with his teammates or his whoever's like the coach. Like you said, he brought coach Chet from CS to Valorant, and I think that like friendship bond is able to like do that. And like I really admire that. Like, he can be like this great IGL, a great player, but at the end of the day, like, they're also all friends, and that's what makes the team so strong and their system so strong.
By the way, Gio, just because you weren't in the game, I will just update you because people might also not know this if they're only from Valorant. The actual story I was referring to earlier, I won't go into the whole thing because it's a meme as to why like all the other things were his mastermind move. But it's actually one of the maddest story. Like, if ever you could do like a 30 for 30 episode, I'd do this about CSGO. What happened was there was a tournament back in the day in 2017 called DreamHack Montreal, and CLG, which was FNS's team, was at this tournament, and they lost in the semi-finals to Immortals, this like second best Brazilian team who'd actually just been in like the major final. Like, they were supposed to lose to them, but this team was notorious because it had the infamous Henny and Lucas, who were these twin brothers who openly, when they weren't in like Immortals, would be in teams called Villamix. It was like a group of people who unironically played CS together and then went to nightclubs together, and all their Instagram was them like in the clubs, popping bottles, like living an absolute like rock star lifestyle. It was ridiculous. And so what happened is this was a thing that was known in the scene. Like, they famously, supposedly before the night of the major final that they made it to, they were in the club partying, whatever. Like, so these guys were just on other time completely. And at this tournament, they made the final of this DreamHack, and they didn't show up because some of them like they claimed they went to their room and I was just really tired and I took a nap. But like only like 2 of them showed up at the beginning of the game. So they got like, I think they got like a penalty initially. So it was like you got like, I don't know, lose a ban or something. Then like they had to forfeit the first map. Then they did come for the second map, and then they just lost. And so here's what's hilarious. Because CLG had lost to them in the semis, and I think this was maybe even like the same day. I think they'd maybe played the semi at the beginning of the day, and then they had their snap because they'd been out drinking the night before, and then they played the final. So because it was that setup, Gio, right, FNS was actually trying to be sort of like self-deprecating. So he just did a tweet where the joke was, he said, I can't believe my team lost to a bunch of hungover players. But he was sort of meaning it like a diss to him, like, you guys are so good, you beat me even though you're hungover. But they didn't get that, right? And so one of the players on that team, this guy called KNG, who, if you know, is mad spicy. I've had some banter with him too on Twitter, right? He just actually replied to FNS's tweet with the most notoriously infamous quote. He just said, prove it or I'll kill you.
Dude, I've heard that before.
It actually wrecked this guy's career for a while because you have to realise, like, he was only half joking in a way. Like, here's the thing, I don't think he actually would have killed him, obviously, but, like, he was sort of implying, like he didn't get it was a joke, so he was actually just like, fuck you up, basically, which is like, whoa, but it's like that meme, like, we don't do that here from, like, Wakanda or whatever, like, mate, what are you doing? Like, this is like 2007, it's 2017, what are you doing? So,
Oh my God.
that became like a
I've
massive
definitely
meme.
heard that before.
Yes, you have to realise that's been said on Reddit, prove it or I'll kill you, like 1 million times now. And that did spawn the joke that because because later that team actually went and joined 100 Thieves, the Immortals core, but then I think they had a visa problem, so they got immediately cut without ever playing a game. People made it like, it's almost like that meme with the dominoes with someone pushing the first one. People made it that it was like all FNX's ultimate master plan to like take down the Brazilian region, because like I told you, they'd been in the major fights. Like he did this one domino that like clocked there, and then they lost his team, and then later. And the joke is, in a fucked up way, the KNG guy sort of never has recovered in his career from sending that tweet, which is like, okay. Meanwhile, FNS just swagging on Valorant, and he's just having a great time. No problems for him. Even though, as I say, outside of the game, I know what you mean. In the game, he's definitely very serious. He's also a way more chill guy outside of the game. People wouldn't know that. He's not as serious as he looks on camera. He is actually he's not a guy he wouldn't do trash talk like that, for example. That's why it was so silly the KNG guy took it seriously. It's like, bro, it's FNS. He's not trying to be fucking tough guy, is he? Come on. I used to joke like, mate. Go on.
FNS has really dry humor, so
Yes.
it won't like click with some
Yes,
people.
absolutely. Right, obviously a question I should ask. We talked about a lot of the other teams last week, but it was this, but you must be shocked at what happened to Loud. Like they were looking like they could just win the whole thing, right?
No, yeah, because in Americas it was like they were unstoppable. People were scared of Aspas. Like he was just having the best like run of his career, I would say. But yeah, they were
What do you think
really
happened to him?
scary. Honestly, I don't know. I think what happened in this Tokyo tournament, like a general statement, is that the team where nobody believed in them, like they had nothing on their shoulders, no pressure. They were just so happy to be in Tokyo, so happy to be like traveling to compete and like that new honeymoon, like, oh, look at my pro gaming career. Like, I think like I'm talking about EG, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, I think no one believed in them, so they were able to have so much fun in the moment, and they were able to like drag that vibe to grand finals. And while every other team, it was more like, oh, we've been here before, like, you know, just stick to our game plan, or like remember do this, do that, and like remember like strategically, and like maybe they took the fun aspect out of it. I don't know exactly, but I kind of relate to like like for us in Berlin, nobody believed in us either during Shopify, and like everybody was like, oh, C9 White, they're the best, they won 8 game changers, so excited to see them win the LAN, blah blah blah. And I think that's like, I'm like just getting that vibe from Tokyo. Like EG was able to have so much fun and live in the moment and admire every moment of it, and it was very special to them. You could see it through, like, to the players, like in their face. You could just see everything, and even on social media, I think they were just having a blast. Every time I look at Potter's Instagram, she's like eating the coolest. Like,
Oh, for sure.
she was living the life. So
She's a foodie, if people don't know. She
Yeah,
loves to
she
try
is.
different food, especially Asian food, obviously. Yes.
yeah, so I think that's what happened in Tokyo in general.
That's an interesting one. That's such a good like comparison between you guys in Berlin and EG in Tokyo. Shopify were definitely my favorite team at Game Changers Berlin, so I remember that vibe.
Nobody, like, going into the tournament, nobody believed in us. Nobody even like cared about us. And then when we played that first match, and then Saunders started to pull in some fans, and then the second match, we like, and then the third match, as the tournament like kept going, we were able to pull in so many fans, and it just ended up like we were just like feeding off of it. You know, that energy, like, it really helps you during the tournament. And yeah, and then we ended up, you know, being in grand finals.
By the way, if people don't know, the guy who was your coach, that Rob Wiz guy, is like a very experienced, like multiple FPS type game guy, isn't he? He's like some super old school guy.
Yeah. Well, I'm not in Shopify anymore, but
Fair enough. In the past, obviously, yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's up there in my age, so well, he's older than me, but yeah, he's played in a lot of he's from many different games.
Yes.
He's a really
Yes.
good opper. So
By the way, I should actually ask you about that, obviously, right? One thing I want to ask you to contrast a little bit is in CSGO, the scene was for the women's tournaments was a bit like, yeah, like there wasn't that many, or it was just like stuff like ESWC stuff, but when the tournament had gone down in size. Whereas, as I mentioned in the intro, like the reason why you and Potter and some of the others were able to win so many championships in 1.6 is there would be essentially like the equivalent of a major every year. Eventually, when there was some of the Arblet tournaments, it was like there was 2 or 3 big tournaments, and the money was even getting decent. Sometimes you win like 30k for first place. I noticed actually, in part because of the game change stuff, obviously CSGO now has the Impact League, but in Valorant, it looks like the whole time there's been a pretty vibrant women's scene. Like, there's been a lot of prize money to win a lot of tournaments, right?
oh my gosh, since day one, like Riot has really heavily funded in Game Changers, and yeah, when I saw that Berlin was 500,000, I was like I couldn't believe it. Like, you know, I came from playing for $15,000 prize
Yes.
pool to 500,000, so that was very like full circle moment for me.
I mean, for coming second, your team won $110,000. And that is literally, if people don't know, $100,000 is what you used to get back in the day for winning a CSGO major if you're like Fnatic or something. So that is crazy money. Like, yeah, the way it's scaled up is enormous. But obviously, you actually worked one of the events last year, Gio. What have you thought of the game changes so far?
I mean, you know, it's an interesting one because, and I'm going to kind of reference the episode that we did with Sapphire, because I just used to be not in favor of women's esports. It's not that I didn't want them to exist. I was just kind of like, what's the point? Shouldn't we just have co-ed ones? Like, you blah, 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 blah.
And then I was like, come on, stop stealing my swag. But, you know, you have to go your own way. So
it was like the goal is for everyone to play together, and especially just from my background, which I went into in that episode, like, you know, I talked about why I kind of felt that way, having come through like very male dominated degree subject and stuff like that, and industry and whatnot. And Game Changers was actually really the main thing that kind of changed my mind about it. And I don't think it's that Game Changers necessarily is just anything special in the sense of like, it's obviously special in the sense of how much there is and how constant, how thriving the scene is. But just at the end of the day, it's a women's tournament. But for me, I think it was that opened my eyes to how much of a demand there is for it, and why people specifically have demand for a women's scene rather than just broadening like the co-ed scene. You know what I mean? And that made it become quite like an exciting thing for me. And it was also just like a weirdly profound experience to have my mind changed about that. It weirdly felt like one of those things that I was like, oh, I feel like I'm growing up.
Sure.
But I think like Game Changers is so cool because Valorant overall has done a really good job at having an incredibly well distributed demographic of its just player base in general.
Sure. I mean, you see this in the tournaments, yeah, of course.
Yes, well, especially when we're talking from a gender perspective, right? It's just like that. I think it's something, I don't know the stats, but it's definitely the highest female player base of any like major competitive game, right?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
But I just kind of really like how naturally it's part of the scene, in the same way that I like the fact that I've worked on like desks with like Yinsu and Kakuka, and there's just like 3 women on the desk, and it's not a thing. Do you know what I mean? It's not like, oh my god, a women desk. It's just that's just what the desk is like. And I think that's something that Valorant's done really well, is just kind of made it a part of the ecosystem. You don't really have any reason to question it. Like, it is part of the ecosystem. It's taken seriously. The fact that people are begging for the audience capacity of the Game Changers Grand Finals, or the Game Changers Championship, to be so much bigger, like, is such a testament to that. So I think that's the thing that I find, like, so exciting about it, is the fact that it gives a lot of people a space that they want and that they can develop in. And I think that's why you see like the, women in Valorant growing so much, because they kind of aren't questioned in having that space. And like, yeah, sure, maybe they'll go off to co-ed teams. Like maybe that is what will happen. And I hope for a number of people that is what happens if that's what they want. But I think, yeah, that's just kind of a nice thing. It just makes the whole thing like feel bigger and feel like it's just part of something that's so much bigger. And I don't know, I find that exciting.
Okay. I mean, I will say on that topic, the area I think people have to make the leap, like you're talking about, conceptual wise, Gio, is if someone does that thing of like, oh, I only care about the best players and the best teams. And so classically in CSGO, this was always the famous go-to. People would just say that stupid line. They'd say they should just compete with the male players. It's like, first of all, they all do in CSGO, you idiot. They all enter the qualifiers. They just don't get far enough. So you don't know that they actually play because maybe they went out in round 4 or something. Whereas like you're only seeing when it gets to the last 8 and it's like, who's going to qualify for the land. So first of all, if they want to, they already could try that, and it's been tried many, many times.
And that was true in Valorant before partnerships.
Oh, no doubt,
as well.
yeah. And then the other thing to me is this, people don't get this. Like every league doesn't have to be about pure, like the absolute best of the best of the best. Like spoiler, if I was going to be rude to people in CSGO, for example, I should say by that logic, there should be no NA CSGO tournaments because they're not as good as Europeans. So scrap it all, put all the money in the European tournaments and you should all just have to fly there. But the point is then the NA viewers, what are they going to watch? Who are they going to cheer for? And I do think actually the fan angle is mad underrated because one thing I had to learn, it's why actually I went from being, I mean, bENITA knew me from way back in the day. I used to just be a mega nerd at the events doing interviews. I was never on camera. I was really just a guy like, and then in this match, and what about the next match? I was like a mega nerd, but what I had to learn was you have to have entertainment. People don't just want the dry part of the game. So the other thing about being a fan of someone is you're not just a fan of someone because they're the absolute best player. Like you don't sit down as a Valorant fan and go, right, at the moment Chamber Meta is out, so I'm only a fan of Ye. Like you're a fan of personalities too. You're a fan of people. Like there's storylines like she said about Boaster. I can see why Boaster could be your favourite Fnatic player. If you want to go on raw skill, yeah, everyone go, what are you talking about? Sturker. Yeah, but if you know the story of Boaster, there's a reason to watch him. Also, when you watch him, he's entertaining. You get drawn into his emotions. Like I think that part's really missed as well. Is there's some people want to cheer either for women or specific women they know. Maybe they're a fan of that Mel girl, or as you say, some of the people on the desk. It's some people show people are fans of you and Yinsu and all the rest of it. So people have to understand as well. You need like a buffet that people can choose from. Not everyone's going to choose the one option. Some people are going to choose a hamburger. Some people are going to choose sushi. Some people are going to choose whatever.
I think it's also just natural for people to an extent to want to see things that they relate to. Like, because when we watch like the grand finals of the Game Changers Championships, we know we're still watching really good Valorant. It's not even like it's a trade-off, right? It's not even like, oh, well, I want to watch the women, so I'm just going to have to put up with the fact that they're not that good. Like, that's just not the case. Like, the level of play is really good. But people enjoy that kind of relatability. And that was the thing that when I was younger, I never really understood. And that, yeah, again, comes from the fact that, I was in single sex education, then I did a hyper male dominated degree, and then I went into a hyper male dominated industry. So like, I've always kind of just accepted not caring about that. And it's only as I've gotten older that I've actually, when I try new things and I want to do new pursuits and stuff like that, I find it actually more motivational to like seek out like women who are doing those things, because I'm like, I see myself in that.
Okay.
And
see
I'm
me
sure
for real,
that's
for real.
true.
Yeah, the Zoomer mindset.
I'm sure exactly. I'm sure that's true for a lot of people. And especially like for Valorant to be such a major esport that clearly appeals to women to such a large extent, to kind of like have that is awesome. And also there's a huge male audience for Game Changers as well. Like I don't even want to talk about it like it's only women who are watching the women play, because it's definitely not.
For sure.
And that's why we have people like, Mimi turns on her stream and nearly 2,000 people are watching. Like those 2,000 people are not all women, So it's just, I think that like generally like it's just kind of nice to have those spaces for everybody, in the same way that people like it when there's fucking leagues available for people who live in OCE.
Yeah,
and like 3 people live there, right?
Yeah. By the way, go on, bENITA, go on.
I was just gonna say, like, I think it's kind of like anything else. Like, there's women's chess, there's women's gyms only, like
Yeah.
women only gyms, there's women's surfing. Like those funds that are allocated for those specific areas, like it's not like the 500,000 that was allocated for us in Berlin would have been added to Tokyo.
Yes.
It's specifically there for women's Valorant. So, yeah.
I'll even throw this in there, what you're saying.
I just want to interrupt real quick. I just really want to interrupt because one argument I always think of, so whenever people like on Twitter or whatever are like, oh, you know, why are they like going woke? Like go woke, go broke, and like, oh, but that money could have been used like blah, 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 blah. Okay, sure. If you're not like into the idea of there being specific funding for women's events, think of it this way. Think of it as free market capitalism, and that they will make money from this existing, whether or not the people who arrange it and organize it actually care about women's esports. They see it as being a way to make money, and therefore, from a capitalist perspective, them investing that $500,000, they will make more money out of that. If it really, really, really upsets you to think of people like wanting to invest into like women's sport or esport or whatever, if that like makes you, if you can't help but be like the snowflakes, just think of it as free market capitalism.
Yeah,
it's
for sure.
literally the same thing.
No, absolutely. I mean, even though, look, this name is a cursed name for some people, but that's actually another thing I actually think brought a lot of life to the game was the G2 team, which even though their cursed name is obviously Carlos, he actually, if people don't know, that brand, he absolutely worked with some of those girls who were some of the best CSGO players, if people don't know. People like Juliana was probably one of the best ever. Mimi was pretty good. Obviously, Petra was around quite a long time. These players were top players, but the difference was way back when they were just playing in CSGO, they were just top players. Like that G2 brand took the whole G2 ethos of the whole org, you know, from League of Legends and stuff, where they have that thing where it's all about your social media style, and the joke is you not only like trash talk your opponent, but then you meme yourself if you lose. It's actually quite a clever approach. Like I've noticed that does work in every game, and I noticed they're surely one of the absolute most popular game changers teams. It seems like everyone's loving like the fucking like, I don't know what the other version of a bromance, I don't know what the female version of a bromance is, but like that whole thing between like Petra and fucking Mimi is ridiculous, isn't it? They're like a comedy show or something. It's pretty good.
It's really good.
I love them. I love them so much. I met them together at TwitchCon.
They're very good at TikTok and social media, basically. Like they just nail it. They're really good. Yeah.
They're so much fun. Like as a little duo and whatever, they're amazing together. And I think that's the thing is like, and this is again, people who hadn't been following Game Changers until the championships last year. A lot of people were so surprised to learn how much personality and vibrance is like in the scene. That's what kept a lot of people there. Like this was, for many people, their first foray into watching Game Changers, and they stayed because of that. And I think that was the thing that I loved so much about Game Changers Champs was it made other normal tournaments look like they were trying too hard. Do you know what I mean? Like they're trying to be serious, they're trying to be like whatever. And like just seeing all of these players, like some of whom had been like, you know, previous world championships, like you, bENITA, years and years and years of experience, some of whom had never been on a stage before. But like every single person brought some kind of character or personality. It was one of the most entertaining tournaments that we've had in Valorant because of that.
The
and
storylines were insane.
Oh, so good. It was so good.
By the way, before we end, bENITA, who is actually, in your opinion, who is the best player in Game Changers? Who would you pick out?
Oh man.
Or who is the best? For you? No, just for you. Who is the best? Or what would your pick be? Who's your favorite?
I think mechanically speaking, Sonder.
Okay, so your former teammate there. Okay,
yeah.
Was she cracked out? Was she mega?
Yeah, I think she started at 16. She started, you know, really young. So I can only imagine like years from now how much of an amazing player she'll be. Because mechanically she's there. She's just lacking the experience part.
I've been pleasantly surprised during the time I've had my Patreon and my Patreon community, the Skrill Illuminati, by both the financial support they've provided, and the moral support. And so this video was kindly supported and made possible by Starlust, Theo Buenzli, Ahmed Hadjou, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Thorin, Jensen Goh, Animosity, Tobias Bernasconi, Bot Pounder 420, Yerka86, Tosh, and as always, you know it, a special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Would you like to ask a question in one of those AMAs where I tend to go pretty in depth? Sometimes they even spin out into their own videos. Do you want teasers to find out who the upcoming guests are for the myriad of interviews that I do across esports? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest? We have a channel on my Discord where you can do that if you're at the right tier. And of course, you could potentially take part in one of those lengthy esports discussions with me about whatever is on your mind in the scene. Well, if any of those perks sound tantalizing, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.